Hey guys, Charai5 here, and today we are continuing day 3 of Doll Week with Tiffany and Chucky's children, Glen and Glenda. So I guess sort of spoiler alert for those who haven't seen Seed, which, I mean, who gives a shit, it's Seed. I love the movie, I will say, I guess, quick disclaimer, even though I've said it before in the previous two videos, I do love Seed of Chucky. I know that a lot of people don't. I know that a lot of people really, really have a great disdain for the film, and would prefer it not to exist and just forget about it entirely, and not include it as part of the franchise. And to me, I feel like it's a really petty thing to do because while I don't think it fits the style of the rest of the movies, certainly not at all, I still enjoy for what it is. As I've said before, I do think it's a great source of entertainment. I actually just watched it recently, after, a while of not having seen the movie. And there are a lot of things, ironically, from this film, which is more of a horror comedy, I guess, if you can consider it. It's not really even horror that much. Yes, killings do happen, but, nothing really scary happens in the movie at all. It's funny that I've complained before about how we tend to overanalyze things for the sake of overanalyzing, but I do think that even though I said Tiffany is probably the most interesting character in the Child's Play franchise, I do think Glen is another really interesting character, despite the fact that he's only ever been in this one film. And I think most of that lies in what's implied, and maybe even just fan speculation. And again, I do think it's really ironic that I complain about, in other films or in other media, how, maybe we're seeing things that we want to see, where the director didn't really imply that at all, or the director wasn't really thinking much about what certain scenes meant, what certain characters meant. But I feel like Glen is a little bit more than that, considering it might have just been a really clever way to be like, oh, multiple personalities, both Chucky and Tiffany get what they want, because Glen is the byproduct of a pregnancy that occurs actually in Bride of Chucky. So I guess technically Glen and Glenda do appear at the end of Bride, because they have sex in that movie, which is a really funny scene, but it's also really, really awkward. And when it comes to doll sex, yes, Bride of Chucky did it first, not Team America, although Team America was far more explicit with it. But when it comes to just the character of Glen in and of itself, I think it is a very interesting thing to think about in terms of the psychology behind the character. Maybe what Don Mancini had in mind was just, Chucky and Tiffany can't decide on whether they want a boy or a girl, and Glen isn't anatomically correct, so they can't decide. Haha, it's a funny joke. But this is more of a choice. I know that it's probably not true at all, but I do think it's really interesting to think that it's kind of a representation of, yes, you do have these two personalities in there, you do have these two souls. Why exactly, who knows? But, multiple personality disorder. A lot of people like seeing Glen as a transvestite character because of something that happens later on in the movie, but I feel like it's not really that, because we do understand that Glen is hosting two different personalities, Glen and Glenda. Glen, the sweet little boy, who has no interest in killing whatsoever, which to me I find super, super ironic, considering that he is a child of two serial killers, and Glenda, who is probably... she's so terrifying she actually scares Chucky. That's just how interesting and scary she is. And a lot of people like to view Glen as he represents transvestites and gay characters. It's well, no, because that's not Glen, that's Glenda. I do think that there is some sort of misinterpreted identity. And for the first few times I watched the film, I had a hard time understanding what exactly was going on. It's like, did Glen break and, want to pretend to be Glenda, or is it actually Glenda? What is it? And on further inspection, it is, a separate entity. Glenda does reside within Glen, and, comes out once Glen is under enough stress. But for the most part, Glen is sort of in control. And the whole morality of Chucky does really change, as I said before, in personality when it comes to Seed. Like, they really do play up Seed as more of a sitcom sort of thing than any other movie. And I think that's probably why people hate it. But I also do think that there are many, many good moments in it. And I think the Glen character it can be set up for really good things. Especially since both Glen and Glenda get their own separate bodies at the end of the movie. I think it would be really interesting to see them come into action. Maybe, Glenda is on the Chucky and Tiffany side, while Glen, now a little bit more grown up, can be assisting Andy, Again, spoilers for Cult, I guess. I don't want to give anything away in case you haven't seen it, but there are a few characters that I think he could be helping out. And it would just make this ever-expanding story just that much more interesting. And the whole dual personality of two different souls and not knowing what he wants, and at the same time not knowing what he wants, was always really interesting to me. And not many people know, or at least I don't think so, that the characters are actually based on an old movie called Glen or Glenda, which, as it turns out, is actually about transsexuality. So maybe that's where people get the idea, but I've never seen it as such. I know that it is Glen literally dressing up as a woman, but I think that's because it's Glenda coming out. It's not really a thing with Glen. And in that movie, which apparently is an awful movie, people hate that movie, there's this guy, Glen, who, has always had a fascination with being a transvestite, to the point where he gets engaged with this woman and he's terrified of telling her that he has this fetish, I guess let's call it, because he's not gay. He is a heterosexual man, but he likes dressing up as a woman. And it was a very progressive movie for its time, despite how bizarre it is. I've never seen the film, but from what I've read about it, it is very, very bizarre. And that might, be why it was so poorly received. But it was certainly during a time where homosexuality by itself was being very frowned upon, not to mention being a transvestite, and not only transvestite but also transsexuality. I think it's a movie from the 50s, and it touches upon all these different subjects, and how Glenda does sort of embody this other character, even when it's still the same guy, but here it takes a more literal sense. It is a separate entity altogether, which is why I wanted to draw both Glen and Glenda. But since Glenda didn't really have a doll form, she only really had a human form, which I thought was really funny, that her human form looks pretty much just like Chucky. So it's we have an actual human Chucky. A girl with just curly orange hair. And Glen his design is very interesting. He has kind of the pale skin, I guess, that Tiffany sort of has, but really dark brown hair. And to me, it's I've always wondered, where does he get that? Is it because Tiffany's original doll, her hair is black, even though she kind of dyed it, I guess, or bleached it to be blonde? And Chucky's hair is orange, so that's where he gets the orangish brown kind of hair. Also, the sharp teeth, where does that come from? If none of them have sharp teeth. He has I think he has green eyes, so I guess that would be Tiffany. But anyway, he's a very interesting character design wise. Why I never noticed this, but well, okay, I've noticed that he doesn't have any eyebrows, but I actually never noticed that he has eyebrows. He doesn't have eyebrows, but Glenda does. I thought that was a very interesting thing. And I don't know why Glenn doesn't have any eyebrows. That's always been something really strange. But I do think that this character is very, very lovable. A lot of people hate the character because of the movie that he's in and what he represents. Like, he represents pretty much the antithesis of the Chucky character. He's everything Chucky is not. A killer, rude, despite the fact that he actually kills Chucky by the end of the film, which I think is another, like, really interesting and very... Nice is a really weird word to say, but I do think that it is kind of a storybook ending where it's like he doesn't want to kill anybody, and he has to end up killing the person that encourages him to kill. I could go on and on about Seed, but this is the final piece. I actually do like how this came out. I like the way both Glenn and Glenda came out, but for different reasons. It's so weird because to me, they don't look like each other. Like, Glenn looks like Glenn, Glenda looks like Glenda, but they don't look like each other despite the fact that they're supposed to be the same person. It's the same body. And I really did want to capture just what both these characters are because they are separate people. There's one scene near the end where everyone's arguing, and like you really get to see that Glenn and Glenda exist at the same time because it's the Glenn body sort of arguing with itself. But you can't really hear the conversation that's going on because it's like Glenda and Glenn are talking to each other, but everyone else is talking at the same time, so you can't hear what's going on. And I wish that there was more of a moment like that. It's a very interesting concept that I wish that they would have expanded upon. And again, I really would like to see these characters come back. I do think that they could add just a huge layer of story to the overall lore, especially considering the just the psychological thriller that Cult was. Already, it's a movie that's meant to fuck with your mind, and I think Glenn could be a device, maybe not to fuck with your mind, but to think about even more things. Will they ever bring them back? I don't know, but I do hope so. We'll always see next sequel because the way they set up Cult, there has to be a sequel. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Tomorrow we will finally be letting the Child's Play series down to rest. Well, we let it down to rest with this entry, but tomorrow we will be covering another very famous doll, which... the movies are less about the doll, but the doll does represent the series, despite the fact that the doll isn't very involved in the movie, and who actually has a movie coming out this Friday. So, very appropriate timing. Until next time, stay safe and stay awesome. This is Char F5, signing off.